between 4,000 and 5,000 Italians in 1940, members of the Italian community, all civilians, were arrested and put in internment camps. This is because on June the 10th, another terrible date, Mussolini declared war on the United Kingdom and France. As a result, a number of people who had been put on lists by the security services in the United Kingdom were arrested, but not just those who were on the list, but many, many, many more. It was decided to send a large number of people who were in internment camps abroad to Canada. The night of July the 1st, a ship that was carrying 712 Italians left Liverpool. On July the 2nd, the ship was intercepted by a German U-boat. Today we meet on another anniversary, which is the foundation, the birth, the creation of the Fascio Italiano di Combattimento in London. It happened on June the 12th, 1921, exactly 100 years ago. So why do we meet here? We are very far from Clerkenwell. You would expect a walk on Little Italy to start in Clerkenwell. About 1850, the Italian community was just 500 people in Clerkenwell. Organ grinders, statuette makers, ice cream makers, fortune tellers, right? But towards the start of the century, the community moved closer to SOHO. Still, you may wonder, why do we meet next to the post office tower near Euston, you know? I'll take you back even further to put it into context. And I take you back to the First World War. A large number of Italians were called after 1915 to go to Italy and fight with the Italian army, which was allied with the British army. And when they came back, in 1919, they set up an association here in London with the aim of taking control of the community. The association, by the way, was called URMI, Unione Reduci Militari Italiani. And they set up, to begin with, a newspaper in Italian, La Cronaca, the weekly, un periodico che ambisce a diventare l'espressione di tutte le forze della colonia. And then they referred to who were actually against the war. A number of Italians were against the war. Ci sono gruppi vilissimi, li poniamo in guardia, nella speranza forse ingenua che ci risparmino il dolore di colpirli. Let's not forget that these were ex-army people, and they kept battering through articles in La Cronaca. You have to obey, obbedire, written in capital letters. We have to actually start from this centenary, 12th June 1921, the birth of the Fascio di Combattimento in London, to actually begin to understand the extent to which the Italian colony was put under a large degree of control and subjugation. It was easy to put under control 20,000 people when they had to refer constantly to the consulate or to the embassy in order to renew a passport, to go and come back from Italy, or to import or export produce. La Cronaca was set up in that corner over there at 14 Little Howland Street. And at the end of 1921, in December, the third stage I'm taking you through is the birth, the foundation in London of the Partito Nazionale Fascista. Well, this is the other side of the story, you see, in the context again of the Italian community, but from another angle. So in that corner, 99 and 107, was a major meeting point for the Italian anarchists, socialists, Republicans, communists, intellectuals, to discuss various issues. Gruppi di studi sociali. It was a kind of university. This is the Italians interested in educating themselves or listening to conferences. They would come here. They were absorbing ideas from Karl Marx, from Robert Owen, the syndicalists. And the anarchists also were intent on action in Italy, mainly to get rid of the monarchy. Now, we must remember what was attractive about the United Kingdom at the time. There had been Thomas Paine, there had been the Mill, there was a discourse on liberty. Giordano Bruno had come to London, had been here in the United Kingdom. There was a major point of attraction for, now we would call them radical left-wing intellectuals to come to the United Kingdom. And some of them were obliged to because they were under threat by the Italian authorities. And here Enrico Malatesta would come, the anarchist, the philosopher. Silvio Corio would come, Pietro Gualducci would come, and Malatesta was hugely popular in the United Kingdom. There was also a powerful input coming from the fact that Giuseppe Mazzini had been in London. He had set up a number of important organizations to look after the children, to look after the women, and to look after the poor people, because at the time people had no pension, the Italian community had no pension. So this group of people who came at the end of the century inherited the spirit of Mazzini, and with an emphasis on education, which is why they used to meet here to discuss their issues. The Italian authorities were worried about this meeting place to the extent that here is a document, which I'm going to show you in a moment, which proves that presumably the embassy or the consulate in London, they were keeping an eye on this venue here to the extent that they listed all the people coming and going. And here is the list of them. And Silvia and Silvio, both of them, were utterly against working with Parliament. But Gramsci told them, no, this is not the right time. We have to make alliances. And so they left Turin. She went on to Bologna straight away because there was a congress in Bologna. There were riots in the piazza in Bologna. In June 36, another June, they set up their publication, New Times in Ethiopian News, and they continued to attack fascism in every possible way, bring down the monarchy, end capitalism, and bring about a new society because we've had enough of this. Right? At 25 Noel Street in 1921 was the first place occupied by the Fascio di Combattimento. There was an ad in La Cronaca which said, members of the Fascio di Combattimento are invited to come to 25 Noel Street to become members. It was also the address of the International Sporting Club, as they called it, and there was a restaurant on this side, the Molinari restaurant. Add that at number 9, there is a record of a visit by Silvia Pankhurst, Pietro Gualducci and Silvio Corio. There was one of the first anti-fascist gatherings by a mixture of Italians and British anti-fascist sympathizers at number 9. Here the Fascio di Combattimento organized the first march of Italian black shirts to Westminster. It was to take place on November the 4th, 1921. So they were planning to march to Westminster in full uniform, and according to La Cronaca, they received a telephone call from Scotland Yard. Scotland Yard had been informed by the Home Office that it was not possible for the Italians to march to Westminster. So Achille Bettini, who was the secretary of the Fascio di Combattimento, asked, why can't we march? And the reply they got was that people in uniform cannot march while Parliament is sitting. Achille Bettini replied, we are not totally convinced that this is the reason, but we shall not march. Instead, we shall have a mass at St. Peter's Church in Clerkenwell. And then there was a second episode, which was unexpected. One of the priests at the Catholic Church, he was called Domenico Crescitelli, objected to the entrance of the fascists holding the Gagliardetto. And he said, certain flags are allowed in the church, but not this one. So Camillo Pellizzi, who was by this time the leading member of the Fascio di Combattimento, objected again. This is written down in black and white in La Cronaca. You can read it yourself. There was this exchange of letters, obviously rather acrimonious letters. And the priest reiterated, no, you cannot bring the fascio in the church. I am not happy that it has been blessed at the Molinari restaurant. So he didn't allow the flag to go in. But in 1922, things changed. By November 1922, they were able to march to Westminster, and they were filmed. There is a film, a Pate film, of the fascists probably marching from here all the way to Whitehall and Westminster. They knelt down with the Gagliardetto, and that was the first march ever of the Italian black shirts in London. Here was the office of an Italian trade union called SILAM. SILAM stands for I lavoratori della mensa, alberghieri e camerieri. It was set up to look after the interests of the growing Italian community in this part of London, SOHO. In 1921, there was a successful attempt to coordinate all the Italian associations under the control of the Fascio di Combattimento. Some objected, and SILAM in particular. The secretary of SILAM was someone called Vigliardi, G. Vigliardi. He protested because what the circle of the growing group of Italian fascists in London, who were about to subjugate the community basically, wanted SILAM to separate itself from the workers' union. The workers' union was a British trade union. A new ambassador had just arrived in London called De Martino, and he organized a meeting at the Savoy Hotel to launch in practice a confederazione unitaria of all the associations in London. And in spite of what Vigliardi's objected to, SILAM in the end had to capitulate. So had all the other organizations, including the Ospedale Italiano. One of the problems with the Ospedale Italiano, which was very well known at the time, so the Ospedale Italiano capitulated, the Dante Alighieri capitulated, SILAM capitulated, and basically this 1921 with the subjugation of all these organizations which had hitherto been able to operate freely, they came under a single umbrella. This was one of the most famous shop alimentari in Italian alimentari in London. It was run by Emilio Recchioni. Emilio Recchioni was born in Russi, near Ravenna. He came over at the turn of the century. He was an anarchist, an intellectual, a friend of Malatesta, of Silvio Corio, Pietro Gualducci. Emilio Recchioni, the owner of the King Bomba restaurant, of the King Bomba shop. Here in this photograph is with Marie-Louise Berneri, the daughter of Camillo Berneri. In 1931, he, presumably inside the shop or very near, a plan was concocted to kill Benito Mussolini. It consisted in sending Angelo Sbardellotto to Rome to arm him with a pistol and try to kill Mussolini. The plot was not completely underground because the newspapers at the time got to know what was going on. To the extent that articles appeared in the national press about a secret plot to murder in London. Emilio Recchioni was directly implicated alongside Francesco Galasso at 21 Fleet Street, where we shall go shortly. He denied, of course, that he was involved, but when I interviewed his son for a documentary I made years ago for Channel 4, his son clearly admitted he knew perfectly well that his father had been one of the organizers of the plot. He died shortly after in Paris, but his son kept the anti-fascist movement going. This is a place where a number of anti-fascists would come, including Silvio Pancas, Silvio Corio and others. And Emilio Recchioni was so well known, partly because of his shop, but partly because he was an intellectual who was writing under a pseudonym. He called himself Nemo, just Nemo, right? His son kept going with the publication in 1936, which was using the slogan of Carlo Rosselli, Spain today, Italy tomorrow. And it kept going until 1939, basically. So this was the heart of the group of Italian anti-fascists in the UK. This is Emilio Recchioni himself. These people were all very well known to OVRA, to the Italian agents. Quite a number of them were in London. At the archives, the National Archives in Rome, you find files of all the people I have mentioned, including Emilio Recchioni. Fleet Street lived Francesco Galasso. Francesco Galasso was born in Cutro. He was a doctor. Galasso set up the very first anti-fascist newspapers outside of Italy. It was called Il Commento. A number of Italians who had gone to fight in the civil war in Spain in 1936, who could no longer go back to Italy, some of them came to London. And it was at number 21, Francesco Galasso and others who actually helped them. And here is Francesco Galasso in the company of some Italians who came over from Spain. When the group of anti-fascists in SOHO realized what was going on with the Fascio di Combattimento turning into Partito Fascista, Nazionale Fascista Sezioni di Londra in January 1922, they immediately set up their own anti-fascist organization, and most anti-fascists wrote for it. It lasted until 1924. It published articles which were really, apart from being erudite, they were really trenchant and perceptive to the extent that some of the articles already predicted that there would be a catastrophe taking place in Italy because of fascism. Galasso kept saying, they are attacking me in SOHO with knives. Of course, if I haven't said it before, the manganello was brought together with the uniforms. The police had to intervene, and I personally believe that when Mussolini came to London in December 1922, he had a meeting at Downing Street to discuss reparations, war reparations. Scotland Yard feared very much that Mussolini could come under attack by the anti-fascists. Let's not forget that, although this is not much known in Italy, between 1922 and 1940, there were over 200 attacks outside Italian borders against fascists, members of the consulate, members of the embassy. So it was a kind of civil war going on outside the Italian borders long before we can call a proper partisan war in 1943. And on January the 1922, you have the first assembly of the Partito Nazionale Fascista Sezione di Londra. This became the headquarters of the Italian Fascist Party in London. Originally it was the office of the Dante Alighieri Society. The Dante Alighieri Society, which was set up in the 19th century in Italy, was actually looking after schools in London. The moment the Partito Nazionale Fascista took over, they said, no, you need to renew yourself entirely, so we are going to write to the central office in Rome and shut you down until you change your views, i.e. until you come under our leadership. The Dante Alighieri Society refused initially, then it capitulated. Its office was here, and the space was taken over by the Partito Fascista Italiano. And it was from here that the major initiatives, such as setting up branches of the party throughout the United Kingdom, Cardiff, Plymouth, Southampton, Liverpool, Manchester, Dundee, Belfast, you mention it. In all these places, wherever there was a community of Italians, there was a Casa del Fascio. The Italian Fascist Party could organize 6,000 individuals to march in the streets of London if it wanted to. They went to the Edgeworth Stadium. There was a Mussolini camp in the summer in Maidstone, in Kent. A large number of initiatives. The British Secret Service became very worried about this in about 1934, when it became known that the Italian Fascist Party was financing Oswald Mosley's British Union of Fascists. The British Secret Service began to take notice of what was going on, and according to people I interviewed, it was here that the British Secret Service, MI6, MI5, they entered and photocopied the lists of members. We know that in 1940, when Italy declared war, the Home Office, the War Office, and the Secret Service had a full list of all the members. Unfortunately, they did not just arrest the members, but in the blitz of arrests, they actually arrested a number of people who had nothing to do with fascism. In fact, let's mention one of the leading anti-fascists at the time, De Cianzani, a number of people who had nothing to do with fascism, certainly not, were the Jews who had come over from Italy after the racial laws of 1938. But the real tragedy, to go back to the origin, starts with the declaration of war of June the 10th, but taking it back, it actually all starts exactly 100 years ago, when in 1921 the Fascio di Combattimento began its activity to take over, to basically indoctrinate a whole community. The seed of the Arandora Star tragedy began in 1920 with La Cronaca, and 1921 with the birth of the Fascio di Combattimento. So that is the cause of the Arandora Star tragedy, which will be commemorated in a week's time by the Italian community in the UK. Thank you very much.
Thank you.